Mr. President, you represent the beautiful state of Massachusetts. But consider if your state of Massachusetts, if 15% of the land area of your state was littered with 100,000 landmines. Or my state of Vermont, which is slightly larger in land area, if we were littered with 100,000 landmines. And think of these as each one a tiny explosive buried a few inches beneath the surface of the ground, and they explode when an unsuspecting person steps on it. Each one is capable of killing a child or blowing the legs off of an adult. Now, that may sound far-fetched, but it's not. It's a reality today for many countries, from Vietnam to Angola to Colombia. But I'll tell you this, Mr. President, if that were a reality in our state, I think we would all agree that these inherently indiscriminate weapons, designed to be triggered by the victim regardless of whether it is a civilian or a combatant, do not belong in the arsenal of a civilized country. And 161 nations have already agreed. They've joined together on an international treaty banning them. 161 nations. They include every single member of NATO except one, the United States of America. They include every country in this hemisphere except two, the United States of America and Cuba. Now, we condemn the use of IEDs against our soldiers and our civilians in Afghanistan, and of course we should. But why not be condemning anti-personnel landmines? Because there's really no appreciable difference. The distinguished presiding officer, in his earlier service in the House of Representatives, I know always voted to ban landmines. So I realize I'm perhaps preaching to the converted to him, but I'm hoping some will be listening to me at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Because I ask this: if landmines were littering this country, in schoolyards, along roads, in cornfields, in our national parks, and hundreds of American children were being crippled, like this Cambodian girl who lost her left foot, how long would it take before the White House sent the mine ban treaty to the United States Senate for ratification? 2 days? 2 weeks? It wouldn't take any longer than that, I'm sure. But we hear the same excuses year after year. I look at my grandchildren, 5 beautiful grandchildren, and I think, what if they were living in a country where simply by walking down across a field, going to a playground, walking down a road, they might lose their life? They're not combatants. It's usually non-combatants who are injured and killed by these landmines. But when we hear these same excuses year after year why the most powerful nation on earth can't join its NATO allies and sign this treaty, why the most powerful nation on earth is the only country other than Cuba in this hemisphere not to sign it, what do we get? The same talking points, the same boring PowerPoints. So it's really bureaucratic inertia, but it's also lack of leadership. For 20 years, the Pentagon's insisted Korea is the problem. But 20 years later, there's absolutely no evidence they've done anything to revise their Korea war plans without anti-personnel mines, or that any president, Democratic or Republican, has ever told them to do so. Now, the U.S. government deserves credit for spending hundreds of millions of dollars to clear mines, help mine survivors. But I also note the Leahy War Victims Fund has been an important part of that, including the money I've gotten through appropriations to clear these landmines. But this girl, and there are countless more like her, Thousands of new mine victims each year show the other tragic side of the story. I mentioned on the floor here the other day about the Bosnia conflict, talking to a young teenage girl in the hospital. She'd been sent away by her parents to a safe place during that war. The war ended. The armies had left the field. She could come home. She's running down the road, calling out to her parents, and steps on a landmine and loses both her legs. She wasn't a combatant. The war wasn't even going on anymore. It's supposed to be safe. But she became a victim. There's so many of these victims. Now, Americans, by and large, also condemn the use of these landmines. But they expect more than they're getting from their government. And so do I. So should every member of Congress. It's been 20 years since President Bill Clinton at the United Nations called for the elimination of anti-personnel landmines. I cheered him when he did. And 2 years later, in 1996, he said, quote, "Today I'm launching an international effort to ban anti-personnel landmines." And I cheered that. But 18 years later, we're still waiting. We haven't signed the landmine treaty. We're waiting for action, not words. We didn't sign it during the Clinton administration or George W. Bush administration or this administration. And I've spoken with President Obama about this. I was encouraged when, in accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, he said, "I'm convinced that adhering to standards, international standards, strengthens those who do and isolates and weakens those who don't." I told the president how much I agreed with his words. And coincidentally, when he received that Nobel Prize, it was a decade after the Nobel Committee awarded the prize to the international campaign to ban landmines. How fitting it would be, after all these years, if my friend President Obama gave real meaning to the words he said accepting the Nobel Peace Prize by putting the United States on a path to join the mine ban treaty, join our NATO allies. This is what the president needs to do. More importantly, it is what America and the world needs. I will speak further about this on another occasion, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.